And good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. So my name is Ben Healy. I'm with the Connecticut Green Bank, and I'm a longtime panelist, first-time moderator, so very excited about this. We all go to a lot of meetings, conversations of this type. Sometimes they're good, sometimes not. My expectation is let's have fun with it. There is, as Jillian says, a lot of expertise in this room, and so rather than having the panelists expound at length on their deepest theories of change in this market, what I'm hoping is to structure a conversation where you guys give some good ideas, you guys give some good ideas, jump in, raise your hand, don't be shy, have some fun with it. We'll get some eggnog afterwards. So the way we're going to do this, we got about an hour and a half to talk as a group. I think there's something like 25 folks in the room. I want to know who everybody is before we jump in. Folks online, you don't get to introduce yourselves, but we acknowledge and value your presence. So let's try and keep intros around the room, like 30 seconds each, which by my calculations means 15 minutes in we should be getting to the meat of things. And then panelists, you guys are going to introduce yourselves last. And I'll give you, when you introduce yourselves, sort of like, what's the big idea you'd like to talk about today? You don't have to talk about the theory behind the big idea, just the big idea, and then we'll use that as a jumping off point for the conversation. So with that, by the way, just for those who don't know, Connecticut Green Bank, it's a quasi-public organization that is focused on clean energy finance in the state of Connecticut. So I'm a state of Connecticut employee, but they let me into New York to have conversations like this and spread good ideas and happy to be here. So we're going to start to the left of Michael and then just go around the circle.
Bill Sasinski, CEO, Energon.
Jeremy Green, Sales Director of Energon.
Rick Cherry, Director, Community Environmental Center.
Mark Church, Senior Advisor for Green Energy Advisor for Association of Energy Affordability.
I'm Louise Casati. I'm Sales Associate for Energon.
Allison Donnelly, Project Analyst with Energy and Resource Solutions.
Laura Humphrey, Manager with ICF International.
Ron Javer, Marketing Department of McLaren Engineering, involved in solar site civil.
Chris Hall, the Director, NYCHA's Energy Finance and Sustainability Management Department.
Hi, Michael Johnson Chase. I'm with Green City Force on the education and training side. Thanks.
Hi, Laura Piccoli. I'm a Client Relations Manager with McGran Associates Engineers and Consultants.
Morning, everyone. I'm Jacqueline Lillenstein. I work for Bloomberg New Energy Finance, which is the energy research wing of Bloomberg.
Ed Wu with Brentford Capital. We help finance via our family offices, especially lending companies, including solar loan companies and PACE loan companies.
Good morning, John Puma, MCOR Credit. We finance energy efficiency deals.
Dan Resnick. I do business development with Green Street Energy. We provide PPA financing to small to medium scale commercial solar projects in the U.S.
Gerald Yarbray with Utility Business Development. We do utility bill auditing.
Mike Hornsby, Chief Project Development Officer with the New Jersey Energy Resilience Bank. It's a new entity that finances on-site, greener, hardened energy infrastructure at critical public facilities in New Jersey.
I'm Rod Kamen with Earthkind Energy. We're policy consultants and project developers, solar, electric, heat, hot water, and combined heat and power.
Barry Korn, Barrett Capital. We specialize in financing energy efficiency projects with a focus on unsecured financing.
Luke Sarowik, ICF International. One of the programs I work on is the New York City Clean Heat program for the city.
Harry Kettleambidis, Willdan Energy Solutions, helping to develop projects for the New York City Energy Efficiency Corporation. Focuses on clean energy financing in the 5 boroughs.
Dave Heppenstall, I'm Executive Director of Association for Energy Affordability, AEA. And we implement utility programs with the Multifamily Energy Efficiency Program implemented for Con Edison. We also do the same thing in California and Chicago. Okay, but we're very much involved in training of contractors involved in this space as well.
All right, let's start there and go that way.
My name is Alex Leff. I'm an attorney with Leff PC. I work at the intersection of private equity and renewable energy project development.
Michael Brill, I'm with ULI Greenprint. Greenprint's an organization consortium of real estate owners that focus on energy and environmental strategy.
John Gasparis, business development, also with Utility, the utility bill auditing firm.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Derrick. I'm the Sustainability Manager at the Community Preservation Corporation. We finance affordable multifamily housing throughout New York State.
Oshin O'Brien, I'm with Agrion.
Great. Well, thank you all. Well, you guys were incredibly efficient. No one even took their allotted 30 seconds. So before then, I give you guys a chance. Let me ask the audience. Wrong word. Let me ask the fellow conversationalists. Does anybody have any high-level questions that they're hoping these guys will address, that they wanted to put on the table right at the beginning? You don't have to, but I wanted to create the opportunity. Yes? No?
Well, I think the context of REV and CEF and the Green Bank, just, how does all of this happening in New York, affect what your thoughts are about where we are in the market?
All right. No answers yet. Anything else?
I'd be curious to talk a little bit about the relationship between, making capital improvements to the building and rent increases. How do you sustain affordability at the same time?
Me too.
How do you deal with the split incentive issue?
Good. You guys getting these down?
So does efficiency include generation, renewables, and solar side, and combined heat and power, as well as solar hot water and third-party financing?
All right. I love that. So here and then back to you.
John and I debated this a little bit in advance, but I was just curious about the applicability of PACE for multifamily housing.
All right, let's talk about that.
How to do these efficiency conversions that we all want to do on a wholesale, large-scale basis.
Scale. All right. That's pretty good. All right, okay. Oh, yes, sir.
I'll go the other way. We get to deal with the sector that's the hardest sector, which is the smaller loan, but less substantial.
A real challenge. Okay, good. We're going to solve all those problems this morning, obviously. All right. You guys have waited long enough. Tell us who you are, a little bit about yourself, what you're doing here.
Great. Thanks, Ben. So my name's James Hanna. I work for a company called Right Power. We're an energy management firm based in New York City with a particular focus on the multifamily sector. So we do everything from consulting on ground-up new construction multifamily projects to doing retrofit work of existing multifamily buildings. We also have a software program that we use to track the performance of new construction projects and retrofits on an ongoing basis. And it's really exciting to have a panel that's focused particularly on multifamily, because I think energy efficiency, when you're talking about the commercial sector, people just like to lump multifamily in with the commercial sector. And the thing that I would really like to focus on today is talking about how even within the multifamily sector, there's so many different types of multifamily properties, and there's so many different ways that they're financed, the way that they're owned, and because of that, there's a lot of different ways that people make decisions about how to make capital improvements in those properties. So just on my way over here, I just wrote down the different types of multifamily housing that we deal with at Bright Power. So we have condos, co-ops, and then within co-ops, you have state-regulated limited equity co-ops, city-regulated limited equity co-ops, those are Mitchell-Lamas. You have private affordable housing, and that can be financed through low-income housing tax credits, through HUD, supportive housing, which can have a whole plethora of different acronyms from OMH to even DOD can get involved, tax-exempt bonds. Then you also have public housing, so NYCHA and housing authorities across the country. There's a completely separate way that those types of housing are financed. Then you have the market rate side, so typical sort of debt and equity structured developments, and then you have big high-powered private equity firms all the way down to smaller mom-and-pop shops that will own similar types of assets. So I think it's really important to understand who the owners are and how the different properties are financed if you want to think of some meaningful ways to integrate energy efficiency into those types of assets.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I want to thank James for using up all the acronyms. Quotas fulfilled. I work for the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC, and we work across the country with utilities primarily in the energy space, helping utilities to develop good programs to reach sectors of buildings as treating efficiency as a resource, an energy resource. So to the extent it fits in with the REV, great question. And kind of the next generation of utility models. I think efficiency, including solar hot water and other kinds of systems that can offset electricity use and gas use. Efficiency is critically important and a primary consideration in those processes. So in the space of the question today, financing efficiency in multifamily buildings. A couple points to make, and hopefully they fit under one idea. One is that affordable housing is a big part of that mix, and we have to think about market rate, affordable, as potentially different problems to solve. They have commonalities, but there are going to be differences, and I think to the extent public institutions like utilities and others are involved, it will require answers. And the big idea I want to talk about is conventional financing, right? I mean, I think we've been through a period of looking for exotic new kinds of ways to finance efficiency, and they're all, and many of them are interesting and useful, but foundationally we have to work efficiency into the refinance and the purchase transaction from the lender's perspective. Right? In making efficiency, repairs, and improvements part of the conventional package that all major lenders use, and then investors are behind them looking at conventional projects, I think is a foundational element. Doesn't displace other things we do, but we build one. And how do you get there? We have to think about that. Getting trusted resources and efficiency models, estimating the savings that will come out of a project to feed that project, an appraiser, to value, properly value those improvements. There's a lot more to talk about there. I'll stop in the interest of keeping it one idea and look forward to the conversation.
That's great. That's great. Michael.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Weisberg, MCOR Credit. I founded MCOR Credit back in 1992. Since the late 90s, when we were providing credit services to utility in Rhode Island, we got very involved in energy. It wasn't very popular until a few years ago, and fortunately, we were there and have been doing it. We specialize mostly in what I call, you kind of mentioned, everyday, regular old lending. And my big idea, we've been very involved in NYSERDA and the New York Bloomberg administration over the years with the Clean Heat and other things. Regarding ideas that I would key in on to some degree, although there were a lot of good things thrown out, I think we can comment on those as well. Is a question about this panel. A lot of these meetings are the lack of financing, and that's driving a lot of things going on in the states with the green banks. And one of the ideas I'll throw out, and we talked about this in our panel meeting, was, is there a lack of financing? Is that really correct? Or is that a little bit of a misnomer? So think about that, and we can throw that out there a little. I have my thoughts on it, and I can share them with you. Also, I see there are a lot of trends going on currently. I'm on panels for NYSERDA and other organizations. And I see we're leading, both in Connecticut and New York. We run a program up in Connecticut for utilities. And the trend is about getting rid of incentives, both financing and energy savings wise. Try to just get rid of incentives. So how is that going to affect things? And the other thought in combination with that is sort of doing like New York City has a restaurant rating scheme, which has been pretty successful. And this talk about doing that to buildings. Almost like a shamed building owner program. Short of enacting laws, which we have some in New York, benchmarking. And will there be more? Is that the trend? So that's what I throw out as food for thought.
Well, I love that. I have to admit, my sister-in-law, she won't let us go to any restaurant that is not an A-grade restaurant. So I don't know how she feels about her apartment in Helsinki. So let me start. Let's reverse this. Coming with the idea that the first of the big ideas you threw out there, Michael, because you threw out more than one, and that's okay by me. And again, I want to remind everyone in the room, I'm going to ask these guys questions, but if you've got a thought on it, throw up your hand and let's get going. I think this question about is financing the problem is a good place to start. Because certainly my organization, the Connecticut Green Bank, the New York Green Bank, to some extent the New Jersey Green Bank, all have their idea in a public policy context of it's a lack of capital that's stopping this, or it's a lack of the right kind of capital, or it's the lack of capital structured appropriately to get in here. Both you and Philip, to some extent, were saying maybe not. So coming back this way, I'm curious if you each three sort of comment on, is financing the problem? And if not, when you look at this market and what constrains it, what holds it back, what do you think are the real challenges? What would you point to and say, actually solving 1, 2, and 3 might be the way to go? You can take one of two ways. You can either say, here's the hardest things, or you can say, here's the easiest things that are actually, if we solve for the lowest hanging fruit, I'm happy either way. So I'll put the question to you first, Michael.
Sure. Well, part of it is you're fighting. We've been going on now for a longest period of time since the 70s, where it's getting baked in that energy savings is a good thing. Maybe that's part of why oil prices are crashing, because they're scared that we're getting so efficient. I don't know. And what the damage will be to the movement, I also don't know. I know some of it can't be reversed this time, unlike in the 70s, because I see it baked in everywhere. My son's applying to schools. Every school has a sustainability program now. A professor that specializes in it. So that's not just going to evaporate overnight. So I think with the younger generation, it's definitely becoming more of a baked-in mindset. And that's a good thing. Are we ever going to be along the lines of Europe? I'm not so sure about that. I'm not so sure it's so good if you've ever been there. I just don't envision, I've been in Amsterdam and elsewhere, and everyone's riding their bikes through a thing like this today. I don't see that happening. But in terms of financing, I think it's part of, you have building owners and people from that side of the world. There's a lot of confusion, there's an incredible amount of noise from all the different entities coming at them. The program's constantly changing, as you can see in here in New York alone. NYSERDA itself got a little crushed in 2009. It came back, and now it's looking at a significant change again. So I have building owners that say, I got burned that time, I'm not going down this road again. And it's a lengthy road, it's an expensive road. So you have those issues, which I think may be even way larger than possible financing. There's a lot of financing out there, whether it's mortgage financing, they can refi at the same time, traditional lenders like myself, their own banks, their own capital, what have you. Is it a little mishmashy as well? Sure. Do we need that magic bullet? There is no magic bullet. This isn't solar for residential homes where it's cookie cutter. My neighborhood had a bunch of young kids out of college for the summer with iPads, signing up houses, and that's the end of the story. They have trucks that come in, put it on, it's on your bill. It's just FICO score, end of the story. That doesn't exactly work in the commercial space, multifamily residential space. So I think there's some larger barriers than just financing.
I just want to make sure we stay with whether the owner is more of, or at least as much a problem as financing. You said it quickly, dealt with owner or something. I think what you said is probably as big a problem as financing.
Let's explore that further. Melvin?
As a former banker, and also working with the Association of Energy Affordability, there appears to be a big problem targeting buildings 10 to 25 units in Harlem, Brooklyn, and in the inner city core. And there's not a lot of opportunities for owners to get financed. And as a banker, years ago, there was what we called the word redlining, which is a bad term. But it seems like it's happening today in the inner city. So we need to have some remedies of where we're going to go in the inner city, how we can adjust and deal with those issues with the buildings 10 to 25 units, because they're not able to get financed. We go into doing the energy retrofitting, and then there's no outlet for them. They have to go to New York City. New York City has limited capital. So we need to have an avenue where those owners should have the same opportunities others in the other targeted communities.
Okay, Philip, you're going to get put on the spot now, so that was a push in the direction that actually financing is a challenge here.
I mean, I would say a couple things that are important. I mean, there's a temptation in rooms like this to talk about like the whole market and multifamily. I mean, the truth is, there are many subsets of buildings that probably require different combinations of things to ultimately invest in efficiency improvements. And I'm sure there is, in fact, a set of buildings where the owner would like to engage in an efficiency improvement repair project, is willing to co-invest, but needs assistance. And that assistance is often lacking. I think it's particularly true in market rate affordable, meaning unsubsidized affordable housing. And we need to work on that. There is, however, another set of buildings and several sets of buildings where I think Michael's point is correct, that they have access. They either have large cash reserves or have access to loans, and they're not making the efficiency improvements. So I think it's hard to conclude that financing is the problem, as a kind of singular problem. So we've got to work on those different sets of buildings with different interventions and tools. And I think it's important, though, to not underestimate how other things affect the owner's ability to invest. I think of it as like ingredients of financing. What are the ingredients you need for an owner to decide to invest in efficiency improvements? It's confidence that property value is going to go up over time, their period of anticipated holding the building. I think we overestimate a little bit the payback concept. It's certainly critical, but property value is critical as well, especially when you're thinking about a lender's participation. It's access to information that demonstrates the efficiency value. I think in New York City in particular, it's difficult for owners to get information on the energy use in the building in a kind of way that enables analysis of service providers. A lot of folks here have said they're working in the renewables and solar industry and bringing those services to building owners. Love to get your input on how we get to you better information so you can deliver services to the building owner and make the case that the investment is sensible. And then, the lending industry, for better or worse, has been structured by government institutions like Fannie, Freddie, FHA, have set the standards for lending. A lot of private lenders, but for mortgage lenders, a lot of private lenders follow them. And efficiency has just not been part of the equation. So bringing that the efficiency needs assessment into the conventional loan process to bring out to the owner and the lender the opportunity to invest and potentially to use other people's money from the utility program, right, to improve their property value. You would think it's a compelling opportunity. So the fact that it's not happening, I think, is really instructive. And then kind of last, in affordable housing, I think there is a lot we can do with better HUD policies around utility allowances, which I think for a long time kind of clouded the owner's view about efficiency improvements. Potentially they lose by losing a utility allowance by making an efficiency improvement. So that's a lot to throw out at once. I'm happy to go back and forth on it. Those are my.
That's great. And I love the concept of ingredients and how do you think about it in an ecosystem way. With a good question prompt. James, your company's in, Bright Power is in a lot of buildings, a lot of different kind of buildings.
Yeah, and I think talking about providing these services and accessing a greater section of the smaller building market is something we talk about a lot. And I think part of the problem is, with energy efficiency, you don't necessarily know what sort of energy efficiency measure is going to make sense right away. With solar, you can take a look at the roof, you're going to know whether or not it makes sense. And there's a lot more soft costs and upfront costs that come with developing an energy efficiency project that come with doing a solar project. Or, in a larger building, maybe paying for a $10,000 audit isn't as big a chunk of your energy costs. You know, if you have to pay, you know, $20,000 to have the energy audit done and the engineering done before you even implement the measures, and maybe a 15-unit building is only spending $25,000 a year on energy, it can make the economics really tough. So I think there's a real opportunity to try to standardize some measures and standardize things you can do in different types of buildings. You know, we were involved in a study that the Pratt Center did where you looked at brownstones, and brownstones, it's that problem, but even a little bit more exaggerated because these are 3 and 4 unit buildings. So, you know, soft costs are even more of a problem. I think there are, you know, 5, 6, even 10 different things you can do. You can just go in and check the box and say, okay, does this make sense? Does this not make sense? And you can know with some degree of confidence that if your building has an opportunity to do that measure, that you can do it. Now, where the problem comes in is on the financing side, right? Because there's been a lot of reports put out there. Maybe the biggest one was the Deutsche Bank report that came out a few years ago, where the sort of gradient between the sort of high-end and low-end projections when it comes to energy efficiency, there's 100% error factor, sometimes even more. So, you know, I think that's where the lending community has got to become a little bit more comfortable. But, you know, go back to Michael's point, I don't think you need to be more complicated than it has to be. You know, we've done a lot of projects with Michael's group, and I think you need to get the owners to buy into your process and the way that an energy audit works. And I can say, you know, as a guy that's on the ground developing projects in New York City, I've never had a situation where financing was a reason that a project didn't go forward, with the exception of affordable housing. So, you know, low-income housing tax credit buildings, affordable housing projects that aren't due for refinancing, when you can wrap in new projects into the refi in year 15 or whatever it may be. But in the co-op and condo world, the market rate world, financing has never been the issue. So I think, you know, there's other bigger challenges to scaling the energy efficiency market in the multifamily sector than just financing, from what I see on the ground.
Can I just ask a point there? I used to run DHCR, I ran the tax rate in the entire state, that state. So there's as everybody would know, there's a very limited amount of 4% and 9% credits. Based on population, it can decrease or increase. And even with that, with the competitive nature, when you put your application into HCR, or you put your application to New York City, it's very competitive. So a lot of the major owners, or even small owners, do not, again, are left out of that process. So the reason why I'm focusing on this, I see a lot of small, medium-sized buildings that really want to be on the ground for the energy efficiency. They're trained to know about energy efficiency, but they don't have the opportunity. There's a barrier there that has to be overcome.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I think part of the reason for that is when you have affordable housing, you know, there's this sort of acronym soup of different people that are involved in the financing on the property. So to go in and try to do what we do on the co-op and condo side and just do an unsecured loan that subordinates to the senior mortgage, the senior debt, is very hard to do. And in a lot of cases, HDC, if we're talking about New York City, HDC or HPD will have something that says you can't take on any extra debt. And I think, you know, that's why I think the affordable housing space is one where there's a lot of room for improvement if you're trying to do financing outside of the typical refinancing cycles of a property. And I hear you. I mean, I understand that the tax credit refinancing process can be extremely competitive, especially
You know, and in that note, James, and I failed to mention it before, another barrier outside the availability of financing is the regulatory banking world post-08. So what they've successfully done, I've seen it firsthand being affiliated with the bank for the past 15 years, is put all banks almost into the same lending box. Because they've left less room for discretion. You know, if a bank is local based here, knows they can lend to this market, they're not going to take a loss, they never did. They can't do that anymore. It's very difficult. It's not worth their effort. They don't want to be criticized, they don't want to be downgraded, and what have you. So that's one issue, and that's a government issue that probably has to be dealt with, or needs to be dealt with. And then on the affordable side, you know, that's I've been consulted by various government entities, green banks. You know, what's your thought? And one of the first words out of my mouth always is affordable. That's where I want to see you guys, and that's where we need you, because in today's banking regulatory environment, I can't do the kind of deal you're talking about, even if I want to. it's hard. And then what James mentions with the alphabet soup makes it even more challenging. I have two buildings right now, basically failed boilers, failed tanks. They can't refi because they have an environmental issue. They're in this catch-22. It's unbelievable. The acronym of agencies you mentioned, it's not there, or if they don't have a giant management company that can advocate for them the way risky can help them win that allotment, they're out cold. So when we do have entities, the green banks of the world, whatever, I know it's not scalable and it's not big giant numbers, but it's reality, and that's where their help is needed.
Let's stay on this affordability theme for a moment with Philip, and then I know there's some affordable advocates and folks in the room, but I'd love to hear their thoughts on this, and then we can jump to another sector as well.
One supplement to my earlier comment that popped to mind, should have. With regard to affordable housing, in particular, the set of building owners that have a need outside of the refi cycle, how do you deliver loans to them? The OCC recently proposed some guidance to allow CRA credits for efficiency loans, which is really interesting. We put in comments on it, and it looks like it's going to happen. And so the question then is, for the regulators, what kind of loan is an efficiency loan that will get this credit? And again, it just kind of circles back to the same point about how do you deliver confidence to regulated financial institutions, and to underwriting and savings, right? So that predictions of lower expenses will get factored into NOI and ultimately property value, or into rents ultimately, which might not be the case in affordable housing, right? I mean, the solution to the split incentive problem someone asked about is that rents include premium or a discount for energy expenses that person is likely to bear. Hard to see.
Absolutely. So, give folks in the room a chance to respond to this as well, because I think it's fascinating. We're not going to have enough time, regardless, on anything. Before I do, the one thing I'll say is, in the Connecticut market, as we've been going at multifamily as a sector, and in particular getting drawn to affordable, because I think, as Michael says, we actually think of it as key to our mission, not serving the prime customers that can get financing elsewhere, but what's the role of the public sector in supporting financing there. The big idea, I skipped my big idea, the big idea I've come to so far, and it might be totally wrong, is that actually the whole premise of leading with energy is actually not going to be the winner. And maybe that's hearsay, maybe it's totally incorrect, but that we talk to building owners and management companies that basically say, so you get me some energy savings, it's a whole lot of work for 10% of 10% of my expenses are on the high end, 10% to 30% of my expenses. I'm not saying it's not nothing. They're not interested. They just say it's a lot of work for that. I've got these health and safety issues, and I've got deferred maintenance, and I haven't been able to. And I'll tell you something worse, right? It's 3 months of lost tenant revenue from bed bugs is a lot bigger issue to me than whatever I'm going to get out of my utility savings. So solve these other comfort, health, and safety, deferred maintenance issues as part of a capital investment, and bring energy along with that. As a green bank, this is sort of challenging for us to have to think about it, but that's the idea I've been struggling with. Okay, let me shut up. Yes, sir.
Yeah, let me just say that at AEA, for the last 20 years, we've been in this affordable housing space, but in the last 5 years, we've been doing it not only with NYSERDA, but very much with the multifamily program that we run for Con Edison. And we found something really new, I think, and it's been really affected my thoughts a lot, and that is, first is affordable housing is not just subsidized housing, not just assisted housing. It's housing that, in fact, people in the city of New York can afford to live in. And there are some owners that are actually not just going after tax credits or this, that, or the other, actually trying to buy and maintain affordable housing that's affordable in their communities. And one of the things we found is that some of them are property management firms that own or manage 100, 150, a lot of buildings. A lot of them are relatively small. And what we found is whole portfolio rather than whole building has really been working for them. And many of them, let's say the supportive housing examples, it's the operating budget that pays for these things in a specific project, and it's savings in the operating budget that really is immediate and demonstrated. We have people getting excited showing us, we've tested in 5 buildings doing the common area lighting, or we've tested in 5 buildings doing the energy management system. We see immediate savings. We don't wait for somebody else's report a year from now. We see immediate savings, then we go to another 5. We've had property management firms that have now done over 150 buildings each in the program, with going out to bid for a contractor, to reducing the price for the job and doing it in multiple buildings. At the same time, those folks who have wanted to do, why not start with 40 rather than 20 and wanted to go out for financing? Most every one of those properties is a separate LLC. They go to the bank, they go to NYSEG, they go anywhere, and they can't get the financing at the level of a portfolio of 40 LLCs. So the biggest hurdle we've seen in this environment of going to scale has been, if I really want to do a lot of these at the same time or one after another, and I've got separate properties that I'm managing, I can't overcome that need. Particularly in the environment, some of these guys are being aggressive and are buying properties. Well, they bought 16 or 20 or 48 properties in the last year. They don't have 2 years of financials on all those properties. So that becomes, to me, a huge barrier that we have to figure out ways to allow the underwriting to deal with multiple LLCs. In the city of New York, at least, that's a major issue, because you have so many of these small properties that are not going to need the big $250,000 to $500,000 loan. They're going to need a 30 to 60, but it would be a real advantage to do it on multiple properties. So I haven't really heard a solution yet to the underwriting of multiple LLC properties for property management firm. And a lot of those are creating, maintaining affordable housing.
All right, let me panelists hold for 1 minute.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that in a couple of ways. And Barrett Capital is a direct lender. We're a private specialty finance company. We have more flexibility than a commercial bank. We do unsecured financing, but it still boils down to creditworthiness. So you know, while an energy efficiency project is going to improve the cash flow of the building, you still need to start with a cash flow and a loan to value of the building that makes sense. And if it's closely held, you may need to have a personal guarantee of the owner. But financing is available. I think, you know, Mike's point earlier, I think it's been, you know, just as energy efficiency has been baked in for a long period of time that it's good, I think the lack of financing has been baked in incorrectly, because there's plenty of financing around, as you can even see in this room. But underwriting is underwriting, and if you want to stay in business, you need 2 years of operating expenses. So even though somebody recently acquired the property, there's still going to be 2 years of operating expenses, tax returns that they have from the previous owner that should be available, you know, for underwriting. So if it's creditworthy, it's financeable.
So there's an interesting set of questions there. James, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you know, just to, I guess, get in my soapbox for a second, I think along those lines, the building appraisal community really needs to get on board with energy efficiency. Because you talk to appraisers, and a lot of times they won't even look at utility bills. So they'll just apply whatever the standard utility number is to a building, and if you have a building that is 3 times as efficient as the same building across the street, it's going to have the same appraised value. And that's because there's not an emphasis on actually looking at the utility savings or the utility usage of one building as a comparison to the next. And that, when you go to an owner and you're trying to, you know, let's just stay in this sector here where you can make a cap rate argument, or you can make an argument that by investing in energy efficiency, even if you're going to sell the building in 2-3 years and it's a 5-year payback, you know, if you apply that in a cap rate formula, you're going to increase the value of your building by, you know, 3 times the cost of the project. That only works if the appraisers are looking at the utility bills. And you know, in that, you're able to allow the new owner to have access to all the old bills, so you know the utility accounts don't roll over when the new LLC is formed. And to me, that is a huge problem that I see in New York City, and I'm sure it happens across the country, because it you know, discredits big investments that people can make in energy efficiency, which I think can also help to get around, you know, some of these issues as well.
Just one footnote, by the way, I'm connecting 2 things. Con Edison does not maintain the same account with that new account holder. So you do not have that history of that building
Right.
in the same way. So that's been a disconnect.
Right, so, if as part of the building sale process, the appraisers put a little bit more emphasis on making sure that they get at least 12 months of utility bill history, but ideally 2 or 3 years, then, you can have the more savvy building owners be able to vet the energy usage of the buildings a little bit more. And I think you're starting to see, especially on the institutional side, because of things like RESB and because of, these bigger emphasis at an institutional investor level of focusing on the energy performance of properties, but because in some ways the process is kind of broken on the appraisal side, it's very hard to do until after they've taken over ownership of a property, and you got to wait a little bit to see how it's actually doing.
Analysts, other thoughts on these last few comments?
No, in regard to the lending, the drilling down, in the LLCs, that's the legal side fighting, everyone wants to be bulletproof. Well, he was an owner have to make a decision and step across the line and make it lendable. There is a lot of regulatory oversight today on the lending side, but there's some fundamental banking, which is the world I come from, after being in it for many years, and you still have to stick to those fundamentals, the 5 C's of lending, things like that. And if I have a person who's just behind a bulletproof LLC, judgment-proof LLCs, and doesn't leave anything in there, and doesn't want to stand behind it personally or otherwise. I had one recently, they wouldn't even disclose the owner's names. We were willing to do it, even without personal guarantees. They wouldn't disclose the owner's names in the LLC. Oh, that's, you gotta go to your private capital, which is gonna cost you a lot more money than that anonymity for some strange reason is so important. It wasn't a rock star owning an apartment in New York City. So those are barriers that, that's just kind of tough luck for the customer. But then there's the legitimate ones, the affordable and other where, I can change it. I would agree as well that, of course, that's where you want to see these entities such as green banks and entities that are being created like that around the country with a lot of development.
So then let me, Rick, I'll come back to you one sec. This conversation about credit underwriting standards and owners' willingness to come to sort of put some skin in the game. Ability, willingness, could be different places on that spectrum. To me, speaks to some of the other threads that I want to pull out a little. Things like, does the owner believe the energy savings? What are the soft costs to figure this stuff out up front? I know we got some engineers, some insurers, some others in the room. I'll put it to the panelists first, but then want to hear folks' thoughts. I mean, this is really an ecosystem question, whether you're drilling down in the affordable world or elsewhere in multifamily, split incentives, right? There's a set of barriers associated with this market that are in some ways very similar to C&I, or in some ways different. I'd love to hear you guys tease those out a little more, because I think we got to a good set of non-answers around the challenge of financing. I'd like to do the same with some of these other things. Where when you guys are out, and the folks in this room are out pitching projects, do you get stopped cold? What would help solve those problems? I like to think a lot about one-stop shopping and how do you simplify this whole thing? What's the role of financing as a leverage point in the system? I don't have answers, I just have questions. So, panelists first.
I'll jump in with one idea. I think I touched on it, but it's worth expanding. And it jumps off from the point we just left about the fundamentals of financing. If you think about from a lender and investor's perspective where value comes from, property value is prime. You could argue cash flow is essential, property value, very important. And here you have the opportunity to have the utility program contributing large amounts as a portion of the cost to improving the property, right? You would think incentives to pay for part of the cost of a new boiler or for improvements in the building would be really compelling. But the brain damage of actually getting those incentives into a project in concert with other things going on in the building is really problematic. And go back to the point we've been talking about, how or that I've raised, how do you get an owner when planning for a refi, because as a conventional matter, okay, we're going to refinance in 2 years, how do we start thinking about what improvements to bake in and to plan for, aligning all those programmatic incentives so that they're together, the utility pays for the energy assessment, the contributions to the actual work are fairly easy to monetize. You don't have to depend on proven savings, base it on the estimates in the approved assessment. Things like that, I think, is a primary place that we want to go work to try to iron out barriers. And I think it's particularly potent in affordable housing, where the opportunity to layer in new money outside of refinancing is so problematic if you have tax credits or other subsidies present. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we're measuring the impact of your projects and the ongoing performance of energy efficiency is critically important, because the thing about energy efficiency is you can't see it. You know, it's a real leap of faith if you're doing your first energy efficiency project, because it's not like you're putting a PV system in or a cogen system in that produces power, and you know that's a concept that's a little bit more easy to understand. With energy efficiency, if you haven't done a project like that before, you're really going out on a bit of a limb to say, hey, this energy auditor, this energy consultant that came in, this stuff that makes sense. But I think the flip side of that is, particularly in multifamily, and particularly in New York City, where we have some older steam system buildings. These are older buildings, and there's a lot of opportunity to retrofit steam buildings. A lot of the stuff that's being recommended is off-the-shelf improvements to the building. It's putting in steam traps, it's putting in heating control systems, it's insulating the exterior walls, it's upgrading the lighting. I mean, these are all things that I think people that own buildings or on boards understand are things that will save them energy. So I think the biggest barrier is moving energy efficiency up the priority list of people that own or make decisions about buildings. And the way that we have been, to some extent, successful in getting people to prioritize energy efficiency is by using the savings that you're getting from an energy efficiency project to put on a new roof, or to put in a playground outside, or to put in new windows, or to do other things that have been on the wish list for a building, which you can finance through energy savings. Because what we often see with some of these bigger, more holistic retrofits is that the savings that these projects are throwing off are, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars more per year than the debt service on the loan that you're taking out. So, there's room in there to wrap in other projects that aren't going to yield energy savings, which are going to sort of improve the quality of life, the living experience, and also the value of properties as well.
You good? Other thoughts in the room on this question? That's right.
Yeah, I think if we sat here, and I'm not suggesting we do it, but the answers to what is needed to make it work, or needed in the way of change, to make it work for smaller buildings. We know. We've been dealing with them. Michael and I spent some time with the proposal, what we thought would make it work, and I'm sure many people around here have done the same thing. The credit issue is, NYSERDA's got a different set of credit standards. Tier 2, they call it, for 1 to 4. And that kind of thinking needs to go into multifamily credit standards, where you're not just basing it on the usual bank credit rating, but more on the reliability of the owner to pay the bill. And that's scary, and regulations may not let a banker go in there, so we may need to get some changes done there. But NYSERDA has had very, very good records of performance on those kinds of lines. The post-monitoring, absolutely necessary. I think everybody who's been in this field knows that the pressure for doing that. There are lots of different plans and solutions. How do you get an order to pay for that? My thought had always been, instead of having it paid lump sum year 1 and 2, you have it financed, so it's paid over 15, 20 years, and then it doesn't feel like it costs that much to the owner. But from the banker's point of view, it's critical, so why shouldn't the banker put it in the financing to be able to protect their loan? The overall thing that I want to say is that, having said in a lot of these policy things on financing of energy efficiency, let's stop talking about it in general and recognize that where we need policy, where we need focus, are smaller buildings, and smaller in the sense of maybe less than 30 units. They may be affordable, they may be conventionally financed, but the solutions seem to be marketplace now, and we'll go forward for large portfolios, for large owners, for co-ops that are large and have reserves. I remember one co-op board president who I was so frustrated trying to sell energy management systems a long time ago, and he said, look, this is the deal. If it's broken, we fix it. And if it's a lobby, I can see the improvements. But hey, get touching my heating system because I know nothing about it. So stop talking to me about that. And whether it's and that goes to what I've always felt is we need to focus on owners more. And maybe it isn't the energy savings because it's not a big percentage. And maybe it is value. But maybe it's that they're not going to be in there long term, period. And so value or energy savings aren't going to sell them. And maybe, therefore, as a society that's concerned about the climate crisis, we got to think of ways to force it to happen. But I really, to Agrion, and my message is, let's not talk about energy efficiency generally in financing. Let's talk about where the problem is. And that's in smaller buildings, and let's go forward. And there's no one out there other than us, several of us as individuals, making noise about it. Maybe we could get some organizational.
All right, love it. Might be sure. We just had the pro-Amsterdam message. You want to come back with the? Okay, and then we got a question here.
Just real quick, Rick, I agree. We've talked about that. Among other things, there are other areas as well. You bring up NYSERDA, and I've been very involved with that for the last 15 years, and I was speaking with someone earlier. I haven't overly studied what's going on around the country, but I have not yet come across anything along the lines of NYSERDA. New York, that's one thing they seem to have led in. What disturbs me now is the trends seem to be toward diluting that. We had this sort of quasi-independent entity that made a science of all types of things along these lines, whether it's lending and otherwise, and built up a lot of knowledge and expertise, and they're doing it in a pretty strong and independent way, and it's been good, or at least, and from my perspective and others, it's been bankable. I've never had a customer who said a NYSERDA MPP report was way off the mark. Maybe in that James reference that they got more than they expected, but I haven't heard less. So I had a comfort in, a complicated PPA project is tough, and for anyone, it's deal by deal. You can't cookie cutter it. If I want to get involved in that, I've got to get third party engineering, and you still be confident that guy knows what he's talking about, because everyone has something different going on when it really gets technical. But they made a science out of it. It became bankable, and what I'm seeing is the trend is starting to go away from that. One, from putting the money elsewhere, and two, it doesn't ring the scalability buzzword and big splash, large numbers. And then that leaves areas like you guys are talking about in the call.
Sorry, but I want to put one thing I forgot on the table, so they're in the room here. Back how many years ago when we really were focusing on redlining, which is what we're focusing on now. There's a sector that's not getting loans, and it's said here, it's redlining. And many of us work to form Community Preservation Corporation, where the idea was, okay, no one lender is going to take these risky loans. Let's put a pool together, and that pool has become a bank unto itself. And it's in the energy business, but somehow it'd be interesting to hear whether it could step in and broaden its look at using a bank pool to try some risks.
All right, so before we put you on the spot, there was a hand here that I want to acknowledge.
Oh, sure. Well, the conversation's kind of evolved, but I do want to reiterate the point that's been bouncing around the room about the operations budget and how crucial that can be, especially in the affordable housing space. And that sometimes if we're talking about larger regulatory ideas or whatever, that the division between the operations budget and the capital budget, that can be an obstacle. But we're finding that in the Clean Heat program that the affordable housing buildings in our mix, which is about half the buildings we're working with, are much more likely to take on bigger projects and more energy saving projects than market rate, because they have that eye on the operations budget in a way that market rate doesn't. I think the challenge that we find is, again, on the smaller side of buildings and also just the poorly managed buildings. Because a lot of the energy efficiency stuff, it's what we're saying, it's not financing, it's logistics. And if you have a property manager that's checked out or a property manager that does, just doesn't care for a variety of reasons, you could just give them the money and it would make a difference. So that's another issue. But as we're discussing all the smaller style buildings, I'd be curious to hear what the panel thinks about kind of these new ideas about grouping projects together. Indicating with CPC about that earlier, but like geographic grouping, like within a certain neighborhood. There's been new companies that have started that are trying to do that. I'd be curious to hear.
I just want to throw out one quick point in. I think that's a good idea. The topic is, a lot of this centers on barriers and what have you. It's because everyone's looking at this on a global level. How do we genericize this? It's not cookie cutters, solar projects on individual homes. Like I mentioned earlier, FICO score, like a car loan, you're done. This is touch and feel, as we've talked about, James, we've talked about building by building. You just, outside of doing a lighting project that utilities do, Con Ed, Wilden have done those, and just throwing in light bulbs and this probe, you can't genericize, running around to this class of buildings, small, large, and otherwise, and have a one-stop shop, a one-fit solution. Every one of them has to pretty much be touched individually. And so that, I think, needs to be acknowledged. We can't just come in and genericize this, offer, this one financing tool, that can get syndicated out into Wall Street and life will be wonderful. I just don't think the market, and that's until people understand that, there isn't a problem. It just needs to get to all these buildings, and the Jameses of the world and others can do that, or are doing that. We'll do that.
Well, I'm going to come out of left field. I mean, conspicuous, we're all preaching to the choir. Most of us know each other from coming to all these conferences. So at the end of the day, we are smarter. We're not closing more deals, but the fact of the matter is the policy isn't changing. It might change in this room, but it doesn't get out of this room. Conspicuously absent from this group we have here is there is nobody from the federal government or nor New York State, and I'm not referring to NYSERDA. Well, there may be some people from New York City, but the real policy people. I think the issue that Marvin brings up is a real issue. The top end of the market, they don't need financing. They have the capital reserves, they'll do it. The next sector of the market, Michael Weisberg and I, we deal with this all day long. The plain vanilla jobs, even though they are touch and feel, we know how to deal with them. And then the real affordable section of the market is kind of left naked, as Marvin suggested. I think one of the problems is we have a green bank in New York, we have a resiliency bank in New Jersey. They come with all sorts of promise and hope, and the fact of the matter is at the end of the day, they slice and dice and form derivatives. They're not really lending to the people. They're not lending to the market. Michael's point is well taken. The Green Bank initially was supposed to serve an underserved portion of the market. In this case, it's ideal for what Marvin and Rick are suggesting. These are the real difficult ones. They fall out of the middle of the space that we all deal with, that we can finance. We're really doing the plain vanilla. So, the funny thing is, and forgive me, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, I've been dealing with New Jersey for 4 years. I originally brought to the Public Utilities Commission, there's no financing. You have these lofty goals for doing energy efficiency. We need to do financing. Well, lo and behold, they came up with the Resiliency Bank. The middle market's not being served. I think it's really cool that you guys are doing water treatment plants, but the rest of the market's not being served.
Not yet. We're going to
No,
move
no, no,
into
I understand that,
we're going to
but-
move into the multifamily housing, and the low to moderate income is the target.
And I am 100% behind you. I argued with President Solomon years ago about this, and it's great, but it's 4 years later. But I guess my larger point is very simple. There's no leadership, there's no uniformity. If I'm a building owner, do I go to Con Ed? Do I go to National Grid? Do I go to NYSERDA? In New Jersey, do I go to New Jersey Clean Energy? Do I go to PSC&G? Do I go to New Jersey National Gas? It's a crazy blob. If the federal government would come in and say, we want to reduce consumption, we want to get oil out of the program, we want to reduce greenhouse gases, the state should come lockstep, and somehow or another this thing's got to get balanced, but the state-run banks should be serving the underserved market, because we can take care of the market, will take care of the rest.
All
And
right,
that's
so
my
I
point.
appreciate the comment. So let's do two things. One, I'd like to hear about what you're thinking next in terms of New Jersey and sort of what the steps are to
That'd
the
be
extent they're there.
incredible.
No, so that'd be one. Then two, I want to do a pivot because I know there was at least some questions around here around the generation side of these equations, not just efficiency, and if that's a different story for multifamily or if it's the same set of problems. And then we're at 11:05, so that'll take us another 5-10 minutes, and then use the rest of the time just for whatever questions folks have without me directing it in any way. So first, I'm going to put you on the spot. New Jersey Energy Resiliency Bank. How are you thinking about multifamily?
Thank you. Well, just in terms of context, the Energy Resilience Bank is financed through $200 million from the HUD, and it's a community development block grant, and it's focused on LMI, low to moderate income. So we're rolling this out in phases. We're a new organization. The ink is still wet. The first phase is water and wastewater plants. That's up and running. And we're looking to develop the next set of markets. And those will include hospitals and long-term care is one bucket. And the next bucket is definitely multifamily housing, LMI. So that remains under development now. So our website, by the way, is njerb.com, so you can track that for further developments.
All right, well, don't let them escape without giving them your best ideas. Let me just say from the Connecticut perspective, we continue to have good conversations with the folks at NYSEG, at the city level, at the Green Bank level, at the state level. We continue to engage, but the focus, as Michael has said, is a little different with the capital markets perspective versus us on the ground. I think those conversations will continue to evolve. In Connecticut, we have, a set of $4 million set aside for credit enhancements for low and moderate income. Our partnerships have been with the Department of Housing and the Housing Finance Authority on their multifamily buildings. But again, it's a different question than how do you attack the small buildings. What's that? Yeah, and we're well aware of it. And so it's in our heads. When I look at New Jersey, we'd love to do cross state lines. How would you put together a portfolio approach? Could we support credit enhancements together that let us get bigger capital? Again, Barry's point, Michael's point about what are the underwriting standards, what's the appropriate risk for public sector? These are all, versus private sector, all important questions. But by no means do we think we figured it out, so constructive criticism thrown my way is very happily accepted. There was a question at the beginning about the generation side, and I know as someone, I do multifamily as one of my things. I manage a commercial solar program for us. I actually think, how do you translate solar, CHP, other generation into multifamily is not as simple as maybe we've said throughout this conversation or brushed aside, because you have split incentives, because you don't have sub-metering. I'm curious if the panelists or others in the room have questions or comments in particular they'd like to throw out on that subject.
On the CHP side, it's very capital intensive. But right now, based in New York, NYSERDA program, they have a lot of leveraging that can be exercised on the CHP side. So if you're going into a building CHP, you just got to drive down your cost with a conditional lender, like they did a project in Roosevelt Island where they were able, I know that some of the energy folks worked on that, but they were able to drive down the cost. And since it was a bulk project, about $8 million, they were able to drive down some costs and get it to a point where they're not being cash flowed properly. But right now, New York State has that incentive with NYSERDA. It's a very decent program. It's only going to last up to a certain time period. But it's an excellent program. And a lot of people are looking at and taking advantage of that opportunity. But that's one point on CHP. But one thing I think is very critical that everybody does not take into consideration. The lack of diversity in the energy field is a very important factor right now. Let's be realistic about this. I mean, I've been very fortunate in my career. I've been in the banking side. I was a regulatory person when I first started out as a Fed guy, and I'm classified loans for banks. I had the opportunity to be a lender. I had the opportunity to work at the Big Dig in Boston. I had the opportunity to be opportunity at DCR when I ran the unit for all of New York City, Westchester, Rockland, and all of Long Island. So I've been very fortunate and blessed. But one thing that I see in the entire industry, the lack of diversity of women and minorities in the field. And you cannot access opportunities or properties in other areas in the marketplace without that diversity. That's the key. America's different cultures, but we lack the diversity in this field right now, where a lot of young people have the opportunity, want to get into the marketplace, look like certain people in certain neighborhoods, and that's the big problem, the big barrier we have right now in New York City and throughout the country. So, I mean, that's something I think has to be looked at.
What do we do about it?
Oh, easy. Talk to me, I can tell you ways. But you know, you don't have the diverse panels to talk about those issues.
We could bring the women in, right?
Very good. My daughter, I have a young daughter, 26 years old. But that's the whole point. There's a lot of diversity. And I think we have to look at ourselves and say, what are we doing wrong? Why aren't we bringing the diverse teams into the inner city, Bridgeport, New Haven? I mean, I have friends there, you know, doing very well, doing development in those areas. Springfield, all over. But we don't have a lack of diversity, a lack of leadership on the diverse side to look at a technical problem of how we address it and how we can move forward. That's critical. And if we don't face that, there's no way we're going to make this change. So I think on the higher levels of the foundations and corporations that we do involve, let's look at more diverse teams, going into different communities, looking at the educational level of young people, bringing them into the firms, training them, getting them out in the marketplace. That's how we can address this. But we can't just overlook this and not think that's not important.
Well, that's the guy who ended up getting 3 white guys on my panel, and the one who didn't show also a white guy. I take that lesson very strongly. I appreciate that. On the generation point, any questions? Or otherwise, on the diversity point, any points? Otherwise, after that, we'll open it up.
I'll respond to the generation side. I mean, I think that in multifamily housing, I think cogeneration in particular makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think a lot of people in the room probably are aware of that. But I think where there's also, you're talking about affordable housing, and as long as we're in this sort of situation where most on-site generation technologies, and I think the two that make the most sense for multifamily are solar and cogeneration. As long as there's tax credits available for those projects, and unclear what will happen after 2016 with solar, whether it'll go down to 10% or not. But with the way that a lot of affordable housing is financed, which is through low-income housing tax credits, there's this great opportunity where affordable housing owners that are either building new buildings or going through the 15-year low-income housing tax credit refi can monetize these tax credits through this existing tax credit syndication process that they go through. So it means that not only can an affordable housing developer, which may even be a nonprofit organization or someone that wouldn't otherwise be able to monetize those tax credits, can sell them to the tax equity investor the same way that they're selling their low-income housing tax credit. And if you're doing a 4% low-income housing tax credit, which is one of the types of low-income housing tax credits that you can take advantage of, you're able to get extra low-income housing tax credit on the cost of the solar PV or of the cogen or the solar thermal or whatever it is that you're doing. So, I mean, a solar project that in the market rate side may have an 8 or 9 year payback. If you're doing it as part of a 4% refi, may have a 2-year payback. So I think, since we talk a lot about affordable housing here and how there's some disadvantages to the affordable housing side, I mean, I think that's an area where we should start seeing a lot more affordable housing folks look at doing DG, and I think there's a real opportunity to do that as part of these refis. Absolutely.
Yeah, just 3 separate points to respond to that have come up that I think are super interesting. The point you raised, couldn't agree with you more, and we're really looking for specific things to go do to chip away at that problem. How do you reach communities through service providers and experts? So love to get some solutions. We have a new president at NRDC who wrote an article last week that I'm just so proud of on that point, and kind of wrapping it up into other events going on around the country, including here in New York City, about how environmental problems and energy expenses contribute to insecurity and the like. So that's number one. Number two, on the generation point, you know, at a higher level, I'm sure all of you are familiar with EPA's rulemaking on clean power plants and the importance of some sort of foundational rules that will push efficiency into decision-making at the generation level across the country. I think New York's ahead on that, and so it's not a New York-specific solution, but it certainly contributes to the market, especially with national actors in multifamily finance. We do have a lot of national actors that affect the market, you know, through Fannie, Freddie, FHA, and others. So, you know, the more utilities and generation companies that factor in efficiency into their resource acquisition planning, the more the market will be looking for solutions and have contributions to go to projects. And then the third point, which has not come up really, but I want to highlight it because I think it's so interesting. In the commercial building space in particular, the last couple of years I've seen an incredible amount of energy, good energy, going into operations and applying analytics and technology to run central systems better. I mean, in some ways, it's super low tech. It's finding the chiller on at night in a commercial building. You just know that's, you know, an opportunity to save. And then more technical conclusions that the use of systems to manage central systems. In certain kinds of multifamily buildings, that's a real opportunity where you have central boilers, central fans, central chillers, and the utility can play a role in delivering back through smart meters information to the building owner about opportunities to save. Some of that might be a subscription cost to a service provider, and I think the financing can play a role there. Lenders often require building owners to do certain things to keep value up, and some level of operations management could potentially play a role there.
Great. Yes, sir.
I'd like to bring a couple of issues out that haven't come out so far, and that is one back to the REV, and what I think we are now needing to look in a place like New York City because of Sandy and everything associated with the feeder mechanisms, feeders in Brooklyn, Queens, that whole Brooklyn, Queens demand management issue that Con Ed is facing and we're all facing. We've in the efficiency community been pretty solely focused on the usage side, not the demand side. And when we've got the infrastructure is really dependent upon, you know, building a new substation, building a new feeder. I mean, Con Ed has now publicly stated that's a $1 billion investment. Somehow or another, we've got to defer that investment by not only energy efficiency, but demand reduction. And I don't think we've really begun in the finance side to sort of address that issue. And we have, because of the REV, talk of things like microgrids, okay? We're talking, and from the affordable housing perspective and the, let's say that certain communities are going to be affected negatively if all of a sudden we build gated communities as a result of a microgrid. We've got real potential to have some real negative consequences as people build little microgrids of gated communities and ignore those outside. So there's some big social policy issues kind of on the table because of what we're going through in New York right now in terms of REV. At the same time, I think there are incredible opportunities. And we've had battery storage, for example. There's some real signs that battery storage with its reduced cost gives us a real opportunity to levelize load, okay, because battery storage is bringing energy into the equation, you know, from that battery, not from the grid, okay, not from the substation. So, I mean, there are real opportunities for financing to play a role there because battery storage is not cheap. Okay, and you gotta look multi-year, but we've got to do it in an environment that unless we take in on some of the issues that just are being raised, we could have some communities taking advantage of it and some communities left on the outside.
There's a lot there. Before you go in, what I want the panelists to reflect on those questions. I heard demand financing, microgrids, storage. There's a bunch of things in there. But before you go, James, it's about 11:19. I want to put out folks who haven't spoken, have any questions they want to throw out. I'm going to then ask the panelists to pick and choose among those last questions around which they might want to address. So anybody who hasn't spoken wanted to throw up their hand, put anything else out there?
Yeah. So you might all be familiar with the REV in New York, new utility model. What are your thoughts on how energy efficiency on the generation side and energy efficiency not on the generation side will play into the future of like New York utility model?
Okay, so 2 points on the REV there. Specific there. Any others? All right, guys, I saved some hard ones for the end here. James, you get to start. You were chomping at the bit.
Well, I mean, my take on REV when it comes to multifamily, I think REV is great. I think it's going to move the whole utility sector in New York in a good direction. But I mean, when it comes to talking to multifamily building owners about battery storage and doing some of these more advanced things, I mean, there's so many buildings in the city that haven't done the basics yet that I think you're almost leapfrogging. Doing steam trap replacements, doing lighting upgrades, doing some of the more low-hanging fruit or even more moderate measures before you start jumping into the more advanced microgrids and those sorts of things. So I think, the energy consulting industry in some ways just needs to sort of pump our brakes a little bit and say, hey, this is great, but for a lot of the people we work with, this may be more advanced than they're ready for or than is realistic to get implemented in a reasonable amount of time. So that's why I still like to focus on working with large portfolios and working with building owners to do the things that are within their control and the things that make sense financially, because when it comes to energy efficiency, there's a lot that you can do that makes sense even without incentives, which batteries just aren't quite there yet. That's my take.
Philip? Michael?
Letting me leapfrog. In regard to REV, I think it's great to be taking a look. The only fears I have are what I mentioned earlier is once you're underway with one thing and then you tear it up and come out with something completely different possibly, that then causes the problem we're here to talk about, that financing isn't necessarily a barrier. It's creating too much noise. Now it's coming from the place where you need the most direction. On the other hand, hopefully, I heard someone in my survey recently told me, we've kind of been in the way of the utilities in the state being able to really get involved and do things. That might be true, and I don't know. Time will tell. But do we have to go to extremes? Do we have to completely abandon one thing and go to the other? Hopefully, what will come out of it is not just large interests in capital markets feeding, the conversation and directing it, and it'll be very appropriate for the time, but not turn everything upside down and just put us back even 10 steps back instead of a few steps forward.
Well, I've said a lot, and I feel like I'd probably be repeating myself to emphasize the same point. So let me kind of take the bait a little bit, and now that we're at the end of the session, have a little drama. I'm not sure I fully agree on that point. I feel like re-examining how programs work at a moment when clearly things are changing and new structures are needed is really healthy. And yes, we don't want to throw out the baby bathwater, but we might need a new bath. And we haven't reached anywhere near the number of buildings through the existing program structure that would generate some confidence that we're going to hit goals in time. So I kind of feel like with regard to rethinking the multifamily programs, figuring out how to better get private institutions like CDFI Community and creative private capital lenders like your company to reach more buildings is a really healthy process. So I think your cautionary point is absolutely right, but I think going through the exercise and maybe trying new things will be really healthy. And it's part of the REV. And I feel like with regard to efficiency, it's clearly going to be a major part of utilities decision-making going forward. And the REV is highlighting those questions. I'm not sure what comes out of it is going to be that different from an efficiency perspective. We're still going to need contributions to pay in a cost-effective way, right? And figuring out what's cost-effective is complicated, and it's going to need substantiation. We're going to have to go through all that before and after the REV.
I agree with you. I think the look is great, and hopefully it goes in a good direction. And I think also, and here we are again, oil prices, commodity prices heading down. Who knows when interest rates were supposed to go up in my world a couple of years ago, and we're still not there, and it doesn't look like we're getting that close. So is that going to happen with commodity costs? I don't know. What will that cost to here? But in New York specific, they want Indian Point to close, and they don't want to build anything else. So now you have to just do it to satisfy demand. So it's not necessarily for the good of energy savings. It's we don't want to build another plant, which is more cost effective, throw a lot of money in cogen, this, that, and the other thing. And I think that's going to be the biggest driver right now. I just had a long conversation with someone out west, politically minded. They think energy savings is a lot of phooey. And that's when costs were high. And the KW rate out there is so low to begin with, it's not as meaningful. So it's not something that goes and gets applied evenly across the land.
So I'm a hopeful guy, so let's end with some positivity. Guys, I want to hear a story briefly, of a project that you were involved in or know of or helped support or advocated for or what have you in this sector that you actually think represents what we're aiming for. And if you had to pick one thing that made it successful, key ingredient, what would it be?
Yeah, so I guess the one I would touch on is, I think we've talked a little bit about how there's, marketplace for financing, sort of more market rate, middle market projects. We've done a number of projects with MCOR, but there's a couple of projects we've done in the affordable housing space where I think there has been this really good collaboration between an existing lender and the New York City Energy Efficiency Corporation. They set up this program that's called PEARL, it's a program for energy retrofit loans, and it focuses on Mitchell Llamas, which are these old limited equity co-ops. They were sort of built the same style as a lot of the New York City Housing Authority buildings. There's a lot that you can do there, and it allows these co-ops to finance what usually turn out to be pretty big energy efficiency projects. So we just closed on our first project within this program, and it is it's about a $3 million project, and this Mitchell Llama is going to see close to $150,000 in energy savings a year, but through this financing and through the energy efficiency financing, they're also getting a new elevator, they're also getting a new fire alarm system, and repairing a lot of cracks and just facade work that needed to be done as well. And that's only possible because those projects were coupled with an energy efficiency project. So I think that's a really interesting model and something that we're actively trying to replicate.
Yeah, I would say we engaged an economist to do some property level analysis on the health effects that come out of efficiency repairs, and the numbers were incredibly compelling. We did this in Maryland as part of a regulatory process, and I think it's an avenue to get public institutions, especially Fannie, Freddie, FHA, to do more in affordable housing to support efficiency improvements. I mean, the notion that we're paying ourselves is really powerful, right? I mean, we'll be putting money into projects that ultimately deliver back values to residents beyond efficiency expenses. And the numbers swamp savings, right? I mean, reducing childhood asthma is in the billions of dollars a year if you can get it right. So.
Can I just quickly mention, there's been a lot of discussion here in New York that I know of between health issues and financing from the health side in multifamily buildings, and it still hasn't clicked. It's been going on conversations for 2 years, like usual. But I think that you touch upon a very important point, that if you could make a loan that does health issues as well as energy issues, and get maybe some help on the public sector side from the health financing that's around, that would be it. So it shouldn't be forgotten, the important way of getting the money.
Absolutely.
And there's just a lot of interesting things that come out of it. You know, I've been in this market for a very long time. With Mayor Bloomberg's initiatives, it really changed tailwinds in New York significantly. I know there was some fear of it when it first started with the benchmarking among owners and all, but in the final analysis, I think it was a really good balance, a good mix. I've been very involved in the clean heat financing, so there are potential benefits that you're proud to be a part of. The health, I can point to the skyline when I drive with my children, buildings that are no longer, that I've done. There's nothing, I haven't seen anything bad about this business for the most part. I mean, it's all good in general. Now, whether you believe in the green and all that, I don't care. You can't show me anything I heard by doing these projects, or any of us, whatever side of the process we represent. So, and we're a capitalist society, it works within that framework for the most part. And then it's about all the nuances that we're talking here, the reps, and then this, that, and the other thing. But as I said, I think it's all good.
So, before I ask you all to join me in thanking the panelists, it's 11:31, so I've almost made it in on time, and I appreciate everyone's participation. Quick last word, that is the moderator's right, I'll say both. I don't know that I leave this session thinking I've got a whole lot more answers than I had before, but I've got a bunch of things written down that I think are pretty interesting to think about, and some new folks to do it with. I hope folks here feel the same. I just want to, with the comment made here and from Bloomberg New Energy Finance at the end, thinking about new models, how they play in the way we actually deal with some very old problems in new models. One of the things I struggle with a lot as we are doing energy work, and I'm sitting on our finance team at the Green Bank, I spend a lot of time thinking about equity, tax equity, owner's equity, underwriting against the amount of equity you've got. But I think that other meaning of the word, equity, in terms of fairness, in terms of social justice, as it relates to a collective system like our energy systems, and how all of these changes that we're going through are played out, whether we are actually thinking about microgrids as an opportunity to have community resiliency or gated communities, to think about distributed generation and solar as a chance to get off the grid or to contribute to the grid, and who gets to be a part of that, whether it's through individual ownership or community solar or other things. And I think having financing models and the role of a public sector agency, and obviously I sit in a particular position, but we're all talking about the challenges with the public sector and how you bring it together. The role of the public sector in supporting private financing to address some of these equity challenges and take risks where the credit might otherwise not be willing to go, to make sure those folks are brought along, not just in who sits on panels, a bunch of white boys, but in who's actually benefiting and owning and getting the value out of this. I think it's a really interesting set of questions, and it's fundamental to who we are and how we think about it. And so, as the new NRDC president wrote, indeed, it was a good article. These challenges are interlinked, we know it, and none of them are simple. But with that, I appreciate everyone taking the time to out of a busy schedule to come spend some time with us. Thank you guys for talking, and with that, stick around a little bit and